I'm almost done with this bathroom renovation, but I have this pretty blank space above my toilet, so in this episode I'm going to build a floating shelf here and here. Let's head out to the garage to get started. Here we have a leftover 1x8 oak board from the slat wall video that I did a few months back. We're going to use this to build the bathroom shelves. Let's get to it. The width of the wall is 44 inches, and I decided to make these shelves 33 inches, that way it took up a fair amount of space on the wall but still left some room on either side. You can, however, cut these a lot longer or shorter if you need to fit your particular space. I'm now going to rip both shelves down to 4 inches. Alright, so here we have our cut board. Here's our 4-inch piece and here's a roughly 3-inch offcut. Now in SketchUp I designed the shelf to look like this, putting the 3-inch piece on top of the 4-inch piece. However, now in real life I'm realizing that this shelf is just pretty narrow and the proportions don't look that nice. So I'm actually going to switch up the design and take the 3-inch piece and put it behind the 4-inch piece. And now this gives us a much wider shelf, as well as the proportions look a lot better too. So let's go ahead and glue this up. Slight change of plans, we're actually going to sand all these boards down first because it's going to be a lot easier now than after the glue up. These boards were already pretty smooth to begin with, so I just took a few passes with 220 grit sandpaper. And then it was time for the glue up. Here I'm using Type-On 3, but you can use whatever wood glue you have. And this is my patented glue spreader. It's definitely on the pricey side, but I recommend picking one up. I'll link it down in the description. This is what's going to give the shelf a lot of its strength, so don't skimp on the glue. I'm using some cabinet clamps to hold the shelves in place while the glue dries, but if you don't have access to these, you can also use some nails instead. If you are using clamps like this, just make sure you don't have any glue in between the shelves, otherwise they're not going to be coming apart. Before the glue fully sets up, you just want to make sure that everything is nice and aligned, and that way you don't need to cut the shelves flush again after the glue up. If you use the proper amount of glue, you are going to have some squeeze out, which is what you see here. I like to clean this up before the glue sets up as it's a lot easier, so I come in with a wet paper towel to clean up the big stuff, and then I come back with a chisel to get the small stuff. You can also notice a nice detail here that I recommend doing is that you continue the grain pattern up the shelf if you're using a wide enough board. I'm now going to add some pocket holes to the underside of the shelves, and I made sure to align these with the studs in my wall. Let's get to it. If you don't have a pocket hole jig, I definitely recommend picking one up as it's very versatile and you can accomplish a lot of different projects with it. I'll link it down in the description. And as I mentioned, these holes are aligned with the studs in my wall, so it's going to vary depending on your wall situation, so just make sure you measure ahead of time. Now that we have our pocket holes drilled into our shelves, before we install them, the last step is going to be applying some finish, and I'm going to be using Danish oil for this. I use this on the slat wall, and I really like the finish on this oak, and it's a really easy finish because you can just wipe it on and then pretty much install them right away. It doesn't take too long to dry. So let's get to it. Now for the install, I'm making sure to use 2.5-inch screws, that way I know they can go through the shelf and through the drywall and still hit a lot of the stud, and that way it makes the shelf extremely strong. If you don't have help installing the shelves, I find it best to put the screws already in the holes, and that way you don't need to hold them in place. You can use one hand to hold the shelf and the other to drive the screws in. To align the shelves, I used my laser level on the left hand side and just lined that up with the shelf. Then I drove in one screw and then I made sure to get it level, and then I drove the second screw in. The one downside to using these pocket holes to support the shelf is that you can kind of see the holes depending on where you mount the shelf, so I would just make sure that they're beneath your eye line, and if they're going to be above your eye line, you can actually put the pocket holes on top of the shelf, and that way you won't ever see them. In this case, I mounted them beneath my eye line so they aren't ever visible. However, another option is to use wood filler to fill those holes if you want to. The shelves look great, but they're a bit bare, so then it was off the target. that's going to be a wrap on this week's video. I hope you guys enjoyed it and learned something along the way. Here you can see that we added a picture of what the bathroom used to look like, and here's what it looks like now. I just want to thank everyone for following along in this series, and we actually have one last project left, and you can kind of see it here. Let me know in the comments down below if you know what it is. And if you enjoyed the video, I'd really appreciate it if you could smash that like button, and also subscribe if you haven't already, as we post a new DIY video every single Saturday. And as always, thanks for watching, and happy building. See you next week.